So good morning. I hope everybody had a great time at the social last night. I want to thank again GTRI for sponsoring the social. So thank you. Okay, so today is going to be a much more intensive day for us. So make sure that you kind of have your thinking caps on the whole day. We do have plenty of breaks scheduled to kind of let you rest throughout all of it, but we're really trying to get back on the track of getting work done around getting these requirements in. And there's a lot of committee breakout sessions and those kind of things. So I want to take care of a few housekeeping issues first. For the people in the room, the agenda is not the most updated agenda. So online, you'll always be able to see any additions as to additional sessions, WebEx information, dial-in information, all of that is on the online agenda. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that part. At 11 o'clock is when we have our first breakout. And so we have a break at 10:45. At 11, we'll have the committee working sessions. On the handout, there shows that there's 2. There are actually 3 breakouts. So let me go through all of them. In Room B, we'll have the Healthcare Committee, and they will be discussing healthcare initiatives, one particularly called HEART. Debbie Bucci and Don Tebow will be the headliners in that room. And so that's what we're going to be focused on. In Room C, the Standards Coordination Committee will be discussing standards nominations. They'll be doing a lot of brainstorming around that during that session. And then we have a third committee working session with the User Experience and Privacy Committees combined, and they're going to be discussing requirements. So your 3 choices, again, are healthcare, standards, and the combined User Experience and Privacy. The User Experience and Privacy Committee will actually be meeting in a conference room upstairs on the 5th floor. It does require badge access to get in. So if you are interested in that one, we're just going to have everybody gather in the front of that lobby area, and then we'll actually have to get an escort to take you upstairs. So we don't want to have to, take badge access 10 times up and down. So please, if you're interested in the User Experience and Privacy Committee, just gather out to the front, and then we'll make sure that you can get to that room. After lunch, we actually have from 12:45 to 1:45 our Birds of a Feather session. Just on your handout, if you would just write that we're going to be in room B for the consent management and C for the OAuth overview. So those are the things I'll just share with you right now, so that way we can stay on track for the requirements discussion that we're going to have with the FMO. And I'll remind you again right before the break the information regarding the committees. So let's get started with the day, and we'll start with the FMO, the cross-committee requirements discussion, and if we can have Jamie and Paul take over at this point. Maybe. In a second. See if there's anything else. I'll just also share that we had our chairs meeting last night, and we did revise the agenda a little bit as well. This evening, we plan to end by 5:30 those last committee working group sessions, so your day is not quite as long. So if you show right now that we're going from 4:30 to 6, we're actually going from 4:30 to 5:30 Eastern. So we are giving you kind of a half hour back. We figured that was a very long day. I'm going to take the mic off, and I'm going to see if people are about ready. You ready? Okay, we're waiting for you. Come on up. No problem.
We're all good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. Still using the lavalier, Kim? Test. That's it. All right, you folks are going to need to switch over to the regular slide set because right now we're on Live Sift, which we will talk about in a minute, but for the next hour or two, we're mostly going to be talking about the functional requirements. It is, let's see, do I have a clicker up here?
Yeah, on the far side.
Far side. That does do it. There we go. Hey. If you're here, remotely or physically in Atlanta, we assume you already know why we're doing functional requirements, but again, as we said yesterday, if you don't, take a look at our plan. That's not what we're here to talk about today. This is a session designed to work on the functional requirements, assuming that we think they're important and need to get them done. With our great gratitude, the 4 committees asked to take a look at functional requirements and produce a set, sent us essentially their working drafts as of January 15th. If you want to see them in detail, they're also around, and you can see them at that URL which is being projected, which is essentially j.mp/requirements summary, REQTSSUMM. We'll also be projecting them later. And as we told you the other day, they also match up pretty well with the NSTIC derived requirements and the set that we sort of had staff at an earlier time peel off of the national strategy. So there's a pretty good first match between the things we thought the national strategy was telling us we ought to do and the things that the committees have turned out, which is great. So what do we do now? Well, what we're going to do now is a couple things. First of all, we're going to review what the committee sent us. We're actually going to read them. This is our way of making sure that we've all looked at them once. Then we're going to get some early plenary feedback. We're going to use Kim and Andrew's clever Live Sift device, which we'll talk about a little later, to get some initial responses about what you think about what you're seeing. It is not a binding vote. It is not a vote of any kind. We don't really know if this tool works very well, so we're not relying on it heavily. But we're going to give it a shot anyway. And then from the Framework Management Office, we're going to share both some of our own observations and some of the early feedback that we've gone and gotten from other places, which we'll tell you about. Then this group needs to talk about what we're going to do with all that stuff. But first, a map. You are here. Camera guy's going to hate me now. I'm going to walk around. We're at the pink place. Those big P squares are plenaries. That's how we do stuff here. Every time we want to do something big, we have a plenary. And we've had a bunch of them. We had a couple last year. Here we're in this year. And then here we're in next year. And if you read the plan, you know that it's our theory that we're going to do 2 big things with these requirements. The first thing we're going to do, after the committees, yellow bars up there, have collected them, they're going to send them and give it a look to the Tifton Committee to try and harmonize them, put them together, and put them into a set that could conceivably be used for self-assessment. During that same time, we have committees doing work to figure out how to do self-assessments. It is our theory that all that stuff will be done and meet up in time to give it to the plenary. You see how each plenary has a cute little tail on it pointing left? That's because we have to send things to the plenary in advance. So for example, if we're going to have a plenary in, say, June of 2015, and those are dotted purple plenaries because we haven't set the dates yet, but we need to do that. Then it has to get there. We've been using without getting into a rules debate, we've been using 60 days as our working rule for, we need to get stuff done in time to get it to the plenary because it has to go through a review, management council has to look at it, privacy committee has to look at it, but you have to ship stuff in advance. So all the things we wanted to do to ship things in advance, to have a first self-assessment test based on the baseline requirements by June 30th, we have to get them to the plenary a little ahead of that date. And then we do it all again. Because we're looking to create a final first set of what are being called the full as opposed to baseline requirements, and do the things necessary to figure out how to work with third-party assessors. There's that bottom set of yellow lines. All in time to have a plenary, which can approve it by June of 2016. So there's your master plan. And let me tell you something. This is not my master plan or the FMO's or staff's master plan. This is your master plan that we discussed in September in Tampa and that the management committee and various other parties have been working assiduously towards. You have always been invited to give further feedback on this, but if you want to know what plan we're on, you're looking at it. Now, in the meantime, other things are happening. You've been keeping your eyes open, you know that we have a standards committee with a standards adoption policy, which you approved and is policy. And now we're bringing standards to be reviewed under that policy, starting with the first one tomorrow. And then if there is, we're going to get more standards. And this is not disconnected because, as you will see later, some of the requirements say you should use standards. So we kind of have to ship the standards to fulfill the stuff we're telling them they should do with standards in the requirements. And we have other work going on as well. I'm not going to go through every piece of it, but the point is we have a whole bunch of pieces here that are supposed to work together. Now, as your Framework Management Office, we're providing some staff help to analyze the requirements. Because in December we didn't think it was moving along too whippily, and we knew that we were going to not see everything done by December 31st, 2014, which was the original plan, we offered some help, and that's us up on the top in pink. I don't know what that signifies. It's the only color I had left. To help look at the requirements now, which is what we're doing today, and you can see a dotted line there. We believe that we will end up giving additional help to the committees and TIFTM to evaluate the requirements together as you get to the end of the requirements process. And then, based on what your Management Council and chairs have been talking about over the last couple of days, we will probably apply additional parts of staff assistance. For one thing, we're going to have to do this thing all again in 2016. So we're there. For another thing, we're probably going to be asked to help do the work with TIFTM of analyzing this as a whole over the next couple of months. For another thing, the Standards Committee has also asked that we find a resource or resources to help work on evaluating the standards, because it's a lot of work all at once. And then probably there will be additional work having to do with enabling projects to make all this actually work. So that's a lot of staff help. Ed, did you want to?
Make it easier.
Okay, I will. We've got a lot of plans in flight to go out and seek and acquire specific staff assistance for the committees to do all those things. So if you hear a lot about getting more help, that's what we're talking about. But in the meantime, we're in January, and we're at this plenary, and we're talking about the requirements as we have delivered them today. By the end of this session, we will have completed a first preliminary pass on the requirements. By the time we get to June, we will need to have that baseline set done, and we will have additional work going on within the committees to try and define a self-assessment program so that we can go out to the world and say, here's a set that's suitable for self-assessment, and here's how you think we should do that. As you'll see in the course of this discussion, we'll need to do more than we've done today to get there. After that, that set isn't over. You will continue to iterate and improve that set because it will be used, and reality will collide with our good ideas, and we will find out that we need to change some things or add some things or offer different processes, and so it will continue to evolve. By June 16, we'll have a second full set, and then after June 16, we'll be revving that one from time to time. Now, there's three things we could be talking about in the context of what we're going to do with the requirements. First one is, why are we doing this? Where does it fit into the master plan? What are our big picture goals? Or we could actually talk about the content quality of the requirements. What's in there? Or we could talk about what our next steps are. We're not talking about number one today. For the next hour or two, we're going to be talking about the stuff itself, the content. And we're not going to talk about next steps because we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So, what we're going to do, let's see, did I miss one? There we go. Yep. What we're going to do today is first just review the requirements we have. Each committee has given us between 10 and 15 and 20 requirements, and we're going to go through them, and we're going to ask the basic questions. Do these things cover the waterfront? Has the topic been addressed? Are there holes? And do they seem feasible? Is this pipe dream stuff, or are these things that we could reasonably expect enterprises and participants and actors to do today with technology that exists? Then we'll talk to you a little bit about what we think, having had a chance to review them for a week or so, and having gathered some information from other stakeholders about what they may think, and then we do want to get back to the question of what next. But first, we'll use our toys. Remember LiveSift? LiveSift.com. You should already get out there and go take a look and get set up, because after we read each of these four sets of requirements, we're going to ask you to answer two questions. One is, do they cover the topic? Another is, are they feasible? We'll read out the exact URLs and all that, and Andrew's got a clever way of projecting all this stuff that we'll be able to do it together, but this should give people who are following us remotely the chance to voice an opinion as well as people within the room. However, please note, it's unofficial. This is not a vote. We are not making official decisions for the organization. This is not a plenary session of that sort. You are not obliged to use these tools. You can sit out. You can use any browser you want to run them. And if you really have a problem, Andrew's asked me to say that if you're trying to get a vote in and this thing just is not working for you, email him your vote at andrewhughes3000@gmail.com. And that's PII, which I've been authorized to give out by its owner. And give him your vote. But he'd really rather you try and use the tool if we can. You know, we'll have to make a decision after this meeting whether this will be a continuing tool, but we're experimenting with it this time, and so far so good, so cross your fingers for us. Here are precisely the questions we will ask. For each of the 4 sets, we will ask, is this complete? Does it cover what we want? And is it feasible? Are we asking for stuff that's reasonable to ask for under the circumstances, however you choose to decide that? So watch for that as we finish each set. This is not the end of the picture. We are not playing Survivor Atlanta. We're not going to vote any committees or requirements off the island. Not today, maybe not ever. This is just an experimental attempt to give it a shot and get some early feedback, because you see, when we're done here, the committees have to go back and take this stuff and finish it up. So anything we can tell them about how the group feels about what they're doing or any observations we have will be useful fodder for their further work. We've got 4 sets: security, standards, privacy, and user experience. I'm actually going to get a little help up here reading off some of them so you don't have to listen to me all the time. Again, if somebody actually wants to read them in text form, look at a document, there is a URL there projected on the screen, a short URL, so that you can find the original document that actually lists them all. I'm also going to project them here as we go through. And again, on behalf of Scott and Paul and Scott and I and the management, thank you very much to all 4 committees for hustling and getting us what you had in good form by January 15th. Nobody is expecting that this is a complete or final set, but it's giving us some stuff to work with, and it's telling us where we are in achieving our goals, which is very helpful. So there will be more work. There will be more committees. This is not the end of the road, but we are going to start. And we're going to start with the security requirements. Adam, can I use you for this one? They're right up on the screen, and I'm just going to ask Adam Madeline, who's our handy chairman of the security committee, and therefore has at least some responsibility for perpetrating this, to read them off. I don't know, do we have the side mics work or not? You just want to use the side mic? Might be easier. You can see it from there, we're good. Although I know you have them memorized already.
Okay, great. So it starts at 1. So
Okay, this is Adam Madeline. This is the security committee requirements, and take it away, Adam.
hi, everybody. So I'm the chair of the security committee, and we developed this set of, I believe, 14 baseline security requirements. They're high level, but we feel strongly they're a very good starting point. So they're not necessarily in any particular order either. So, requirement 1, service providers in the ecosystem follow recognized information security standards, frameworks, and/or appropriate practices. Requirement 2, each account credential pair is uniquely identifiable for authentication purposes. 3, the confidentiality and integrity of identity data, i.e. attribute values, is protected during the execution of all identity functions and across the entirety of the data lifecycle, that is, collection through destruction. 4, credential and token issuance processes protect against unauthorized disclosure and or reproduction. 5, users are able to authenticate the source of all token and credential data received from service providers. Continuing, number 6, credentials and associated tokens are granted to the appropriate and intended users only. 7, there are clear processes, policies, procedures in place for the execution of identity functions. Exciting? Number 8, end users have access to the policies and procedures in place for the execution of identity functions. 9, the confidentiality and integrity of authentication data are protected data such as passwords and passphrases, used for authentication are never stored in plain text. Number 10, user control of the token is proven during the authentication process. 11, users must be able to choose authentication mechanisms that are stronger than single-factor passwords and passphrases and are commensurate with the level of risk associated with the transaction. Last 4. Number 12, service providers have established policies, procedures, and processes in place to maintain availability of services. 13, where cryptographic solutions are used, key management policies and practices are established and used consistent with industry standards and best practices. 14, processes for the reissuance and or recovery of credentials and authentication tokens are commensurate with the original process and procedures followed during registration and credentialing core operations, including identity assurance procedures. And our last requirement, transactions and security events, to include the execution of identity functions,
That's fine.
are logged in a manner that supports system audits and, where necessary, security investigations. Timestamp synchronization and granularity are appropriate to the level of risk associated with the environment, sector, or transaction. That's the set of draft requirements that the Security Committee has put forth.
Thanks very much, Adam. And can we switch to the live step screen? Now, you should know there's a 30-second or so delay on the broadcast, so when we do things here, we're going to wait 30 seconds and make sure that remote people can catch up. The code, boy, they really don't pop that out where you can see it. Once you, if you wish to participate, open a browser. And if you open a browser, you should open it to LiveSift, LIVESIFT.com. And the code is HR numeral 8E, HR8E. I don't think it's case sensitive from our earlier experiments, and we should be seeing something pop up. Looking for question 1? Does it only show when basically? Okay, let me put it in and see what I get. Make sure we're playing along with the home audience here. Although I'm staff, I don't get to vote. Okay. All right. Waiting for facilitator. Welcome to the FMO requirements discussion. We should be on question A. Okay, my screen, if you're following along, just popped up with degree of completeness and degree of feasibility. And here's your first vote. We're going to give each of these at least 60 seconds to 90 seconds to make sure everybody gets to catch up. And for the record, I have to vote to see what's happening on the screen, so I'm voting neutral every time. Yeah. Yeah. Give it about 30 more seconds. Okay. What do you think? Are we close? No? Andrew's mind meld with the internet says we still have a few more coming in here. As you can see, instant feedback. Most of the folks on the voting device think that the security requirements are in pretty good shape in terms of completeness. How about it, Your Worship? I think I'm going to call it. Okay, so there you go. Good job, Adam. Good job, committee. Let's do the other vote on this one. And this is not about completeness. This is about feasibility. Is this stuff within reach? Andrew says he thinks there's a lot of security committee people voting. Such a skeptic. All right, little lower here, you can see the vote shaping up. I'm not going to do a Howard Cosell and do color commentary if this thing changes, but you can see there's a few more doubters on feasibility than we had on coverage. We'll go about 60 seconds on this one. We haven't heard from the outer precincts. Right. Oh, you're doing the mobile version? Yeah, good. I don't know, my working guess, Andrew, is that if I'm picking it up as a voter on my cell, I'm seeing it pretty much at the same time as everybody else. Want to give it a minute? Okay. Okay, your plenary vice chairman is Ref down there in the front row, making sure we hold it open long enough for everybody to catch up. Okay, ka-ching. Note. Different outcome. Less than half say this thing is ready for prime time and it's clear. No, hold it. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's weird. Look at how that's, boy, the order in which those things are displayed. You have to add the 34 and the 16. Yeah, okay, that's exactly half. No idea, but anybody who participates in this can punch a button at the end of this and get a report. So we're not going to try and do quant on this stuff because it's not binding, but if you are curious, then when you're done voting, the thing pops up and says, would you like to see the results? So feel free to self-serve on that. Okay, so the answer is about half of the group think this is all feasible stuff for today and clear enough to be implemented. The other half either don't have an opinion or have doubts. Okay, that's what we wanted to know. Moving on. Can you switch back? We're on to the standards requirements, and if I remember correctly, our erstwhile standards chair told me that I'm entitled to blame Lionel primarily for the project of creating the requirements. So we got a mic for, there you go.
Actually, the interoperability requirement.
For the folks who are on the remote, Kathy makes the point that these are only the interoperability requirements, and as we said at the beginning, we don't want to do too many caveats because we know this stuff is early, we know this stuff is draft, and we expect it will be incomplete, but we're still taking an assessment of what we got at this time. Kathy, is there anything else that has to be said as a caveat before we start this?
But with regard to standards requirements, I just wanted to make the point that in all of the four categories, you know, privacy and security and interoperability and user experience, the standards requirements may derive out of all four of those categories. And so that's why I think it's important to note that what we focused on here was the interoperability requirements.
Gotcha. And Lionel, you'll see in these screens, I've got the first four up as they were, and then the second set are, you know, I've given them numbers, but they're the best practices.
Okay.
Alrighty, so take it away, Lionel.
I don't want to be on camera.
Just put him somewhere where there we go. No, that works, that really works, it's a good visual.
All right, so.
I think one question that's coming from the remote audience, though, is there a, if we have people who disagree with information, like maybe it's not as complete, do we want to hear why they think it's incomplete?
Didn't hear that. The question is, do we want further information on why they're incomplete? And the answer is, the committees want that information. We're not set up in this session to be able to collect all that information.
So if you have
we will do a general Q&A at the end, but in a session like this, we're not voting, we're not doing an official poll, we're just getting a sense, and therefore, if we're going to collect specific information on incompleteness, we're going to do it through the process, which means it is the committee, not an auditorium full of people, who needs to get the precise feedback. And as you'll see later on, we'll be talking about some precise feedback and how it's going to get back to the committees. So I would not derail this process by going deep dives into that at this time.
So just make sure that if you do have feedback to provide that to the committees, and there'll be more information on that That way I just wanted to make sure.
Exactly. If you have a reason you think the stuff is either incomplete or infeasible, you need to get it back to the authors so they can address those concerns, right?
All right, so number one, entities shall be capable of accepting external users authenticated by third parties. So just read them off. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Two, entities shall issue credentialed and/or assertions that conform to IDESG adopted standards and are capable of being utilized by multiple third parties. Number three, entities that perform identity ecosystem core operations and functions that support transactions requiring digital identity, authentication, and/or access control shall utilize technologies to communicate and exchange identity and/or attribute-related data that conform to IDESG-approved standards. 4, entities shall employ documented, publicly available business policies and processes for identity management functions such as account recovery, identity proofing, identity vetting, and liability that are employed in the transmission, receipt, or acceptance of data between systems. And 5,
Honestly, what we should probably do in service to Kathy's point out, from here on out, these were labeled as best practices, not.
yeah, and it was for future requirements. So I guess you want to go ahead and read them, or, okay. So best practice 1, entities should utilize solutions and technologies that allow for identity accounting portability. A, identity providers and attribute providers should provide an easy-to-use method to allow individuals to switch to new providers or a new providers. Identity providers and attribute providers should provide individuals a mechanism to link their relying party accounts with their new provider. C, relying parties should provide individuals with a mechanism to associate multiple credentials to a single account. D, relying parties should provide individuals with a mechanism to have a single account per credential. And E, service providers should, and that should be all uppercase, utilize solutions and technology that allow for affordable identity account portability when established open standards are available. Best practice 2, number 6, organizations shall utilize standard taxonomies to enable semantic interoperability of identity attributes within communities where standards have been established in which they operate, consumer consent and identity metadata. Best practice 3, organizations shall employ standardized common models and processes for identity management functions such as account recovery, identity proofing, identity vetting, and liability when established open standards are available and appropriate to fulfill those functions in the context of that organization's activities. And out of scope, 8, entities should implement modular identity solutions.
Okay. And let's just do it for the sake of anybody who asks. Out of scope meant what?
Out of scope meant that it felt that this derived requirement was not a part of the interoperability ad hoc group under the SEC. And we felt that maybe it's somewhere in another committee.
But it was worth mentioning.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lionel. All righty, back to the tool then. Guys, if you can switch it up. Again, we're going to ask if these are reasonably complete and if they're reasonably feasible. And if you haven't logged in yet, it should be in the same session. It's code HR8E. We're going to wait a second for remote to catch up, and then let me look at my screen and say, yep, there it goes. I'm getting my opportunity to vote now. Boy, how do you make this thing interesting to watch, huh? We need Howard Cosell in here. And disagree is pulling ahead. connected to heart monitors? Is that to make sure we don't have any dead voters, or is that an anti-LBJ device? What are we talking about here, Lionel? Okay, we need about 30 to 60 more seconds to make sure we bring in the crowd from the home audience. Somebody used that phrase yesterday. It sounds very Bob Barker. Okay, well, it looks like we're sneaking up on the conclusion that the standards requirements are indeed close to complete, although it's not unanimous. Ready to close this one, Andrew? Okay, so there you go. And again, thank you, Kathy and Lionel and committee. And now we're going to switch to the second question, which is how feasible standards requirements are in the current draft form. Are they a good ask or asking too much? All over the map. Looks like a Democratic presidential primary. We're still holding it open for remote. It's looking about half and half, if I can be so bold as to interpolate results like that. Okay, let me know when you want to call it, Andrew. On the next setup. Think we're there? Okay, the ref said, oh, there's another one coming in. Okay, and the results are about half and half. Equal numbers agree and disagree, and a big bunch in the middle. So are these feasible and clear today? Mixed bag. Want to switch back for me? Now, who am I going to figure to read the privacy requirements? I don't think our guru from MITRE is here. Somebody want to take that on? Oh, there you go. I got a volunteer. Excellent. Good man. No? I can't quite tell. See? We switch back? Okay, I got to go to the next button. There we go. Come on down. You're the next contestant on Requirements Are Right. And you got to introduce yourself for the home audience.
It's worth noting.
Audio issue. Bear with us.
That better? So what you see here is not it's not everything. There's a lot more guidance provided by each core operation, the goal of which is to provide information to organizations trying to attest to these requirements, sort of a menu based on what kind of operations they conduct, information on sort of how to conform and provide a little more details of the scope of these requirements. So some of them may seem pretty high level or somewhat more aspirational than we've scoped them to be at the core operation level. So all those disclaimers. Also deleted one of these.
Got him on the screen too.
I want to make sure that, because we've been... So organizations shall limit the collection and transmission of information to the minimum necessary to fulfill the transaction's purpose and related legal requirements. Number 2, organizations shall limit the use of individuals' data that is collected and transmitted to the specified purposes of the transaction. Number 3, organizations shall limit the retention of data to the time necessary for providing and administering the services and transactions to the individual end user for which the data was collected, except as otherwise required by law. Number 4, organizations shall provide concise, meaningful, timely, and easy to use or easy to understand mechanisms to communicate with end users how they collect, use, disseminate, and maintain personal information. Number 5, organizations shall minimize data aggregation, including linkages across transactions. Number 6, organizations shall provide appropriate mechanisms to enable individuals to access, correct, and delete personal information. Okay. Number 7, organizations shall determine the necessary quality of data used in identity assurance solutions based on the risk of that transaction, including to the individuals involved. Number 8, we've actually stricken from the list, so we won't worry about that one. Number 9, organizations shall be accountable for conformance to these requirements and provide mechanisms for auditing, validation, and verification. This is actually a requirement that the committee expects to apply to all of the requirements listed. It's got critical importance to privacy, but we wanted to include this with the expectation that this will sort of likely be leveled up to apply to conforming to all the requirements. Number 10, organizations shall provide effective redress mechanisms for, and I think we've changed this, facilitation on behalf of individuals who believe their rights under these requirements have been violated. Number 11, where individuals make choices regarding the treatment of their information, such as to restrict particular uses, those choices shall be automatically applied to all parties downstream from the initial transaction. Number 12, organizations shall, where feasible, utilize identity solutions that enable transactions that are anonymous with validated attributes, pseudonymous, and/or uniquely identified. 13, organizations will request individuals' credentials only when necessary for the transaction and then only as appropriate to the risk associated with that transaction or only as appropriate to the risks to the parties associated with the transaction. Number 14, participation in the identity ecosystem shall be voluntary. Number 15, privacy controls should be situated as low in the technology stack as possible. Number 16, organizations shall clearly indicate to individuals what personal information is mandatory and what personal information is optional prior to the transaction. Number 17, controls on the processing or use of individuals' information shall be commensurate with the degree of risk of the processing or use. Number 18, identifiers shall be segregated from attributes whenever feasible. So, again, still in process for most of these, but, oh yeah, right. 19, organizations shall, upon any material changes to a service that affect the prior or ongoing collection, use, dissemination, or maintenance of users' personal information, A, provide clear and conspicuous descriptions of the changes and their impacts on users in advance, and B, with respect to the previously collected personal information, provide users with compensating controls designed to mitigate privacy risks that may arise from material changes, which may include seeking express affirmative consent of users in accordance with relevant law or regulation. In the event that users elect to terminate the service, organizations shall meet other stated requirements on termination and retention.
Okay, thank you very much. And if we can turn over to the tool, let's see if we're going to vote him off the island. If you've been in the session, you should already be in HR8E. Let me flip over to my own cell phone and see if it's, yep, there it is. We'll be asking if those are reasonably complete, and we'll be asking if they are reasonably feasible for implementation. And I think Andrew and his team are going to start the first of those two votes momentarily. Mine just popped up. One of the things you might want to keep in mind is that you don't have to vote right away. You can lurk, watch the vote, see the results on the screen, and then decide what you're going to do. I have been explicitly asked to point this out by your management. Can't do that in a presidential election.
We're all waiting for each other. This could take
Talk to the management. No, that Andrew, not Hand. pretty good outcome for the live audience. Remote should just be coming in. Strongly disagree is, oh, I see. It runs out of room for the percent. I got it. Looks like it's 2.7. Boy, it's weird on this thing, isn't it, that it factors it so that the strongly disagree is between. Yeah. About 60 more seconds.
Good. I did want to reiterate what Sean mentioned, which is that the privacy requirements, the listing here is really only the starting point of what the privacy committee provided within their spreadsheet, and there are links to the full spreadsheet that Jamie has provided here. So definitely at some point, please look at the entire spreadsheet, not just the list of statements.
That's Paul Knight, who works with us, pointing out that there's a lot more to each of these individual submissions than just this list that we're reading. And of course, there will continue to be a lot more as we develop it. Ready? Okay, so it looks like pretty profound agreement that these are complete and cover the waterfront. Thank you, Privacy Committee. So can we go to the second question, which is how feasible they are? I should say feasible and clear, and that's just opening up. And if you're with us remotely, you should be starting to see the results now. Like we're sneaking up on another half and half here, but all precincts have not yet been heard from. And since I've got a moment watching the excitement here, I'll just back over the point that Paul made and run over it a few more times. We didn't just get lists. We got lists, we got tables, we got some committees who fully performed the stuff that they were asked to do in December and assigned roles and sort of placed their work within the functional model, which is very helpful, something we're all going to have to do at some point. Others did not get that far in their work, but let's remember we were asking them for whatever work they had at the time as of January 15th. One of the things we're going to do in this conversation is figure out when we're going to get done with this process. That's towards the end of this session. How close are we, Andrew? 30 more seconds? Okay. It is. Well, so far what I see is more disagreeing than agreeing, but a lot of neutrals. Getting color commentary from Kim over here, too. Okay. And our referee has called time. So there you go, mixed bag. That doesn't mean these aren't good. That means we need to think about what will happen when we send them out to the world, and people look at them and say, can I play ball with this? Is this something I can implement? Sometimes it may not be a feasibility thing. Sometimes it may be a clarity thing. In other words, I don't know, reading this, whether I can do it or not, which is something we're going to need to address in the next QC loop for all this work. Ready to move on? Can we switch back? Do we have some, I don't think Mary Hodder is physically with us in Atlanta. Do we have somebody around from UX who wants to do the stand-up on the user experience requirements? Or otherwise, I'm just going to talk Paul into it. Oh, I got one. Excellent. Come on down. Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any, warnings or caveats, or do we just go ahead and read the group?
And jump right in. My name is Ellen Doe. I'm with the NSTIC NPO, and I've been participating on the User Experience Committee. So the committee has come up with these draft requirements, and there is a great deal of additional guidance and sub-requirements that aren't listed here, but I'll go through these high-level requirements right now. Number one is the information presented to users should be in plain language, which is clear and easy to understand. Number two, all choices, pathways, and solutions should be available and clearly identifiable by the user. Three, the system shall make reasonable accommodations to be accessible to as many users as is feasible. Number four, the system should have a way to collect user feedback on site usability while conforming with the other high-level requirements. And number five, the system should provide opportunity for redress, an easy way for users to report errors, complaints, etc., while preserving user privacy. Number six, where user requirements or standards exist, users should have structured opportunities to document and express the requirements before interacting with service providers in online transactions, e.g. do not track, link. And the last one, number seven, users shall or should, not sure yet, see simple, easy to understand, and persistent methods for choosing and communicating their unique requirements, state, claim, and promote about their attributes and how they are used. Users should see simple, clear language responses from an organization about how these requirements will be treated before agreeing to share their attributes.
Thanks very much. And that's it. And we're back to Survivor Atlanta. Can you guys switch? Thank you. And we'll be voting again. This is the last set. And when we're done with this, we'll be a little bit more than halfway through this session. First on the completeness, and then on the perceived feasibility of that draft set for user experience. Here we go. Okay, my screen says the poll's open remotely as well. While we're waiting, one of the things we're going to be talking about in the second half of this session and also in the future is what happens when a prospective participant in a federation or somebody who might want to use a self-assessment tool or a third-party assessment tool that this group generates takes a look at this list. Do they say, I don't understand what that means? Do they say, I get it? Do they say, I can do that? Do they say, I can't do that? One of the issues that we have that is in a sense a UX issue, by the way, but it's also promotion and community building, is whether we're putting out stuff out there that is useful and recognizable to the intended targets. How are we doing on time? Pretty close? Okay. Waiting for the referee to call the flag. Okay, looks like 36 and 36 in the middle, so we're half and half, give or take. Mixed bag on completeness, but about as many feel good about it as don't or don't have an opinion. There's there's a fairly large neutral group. We switch to the second question, which is the feasibility of those requirements. Just a reminder one more time while we're sitting here riffing, an advertisement for how to use the thing. At the end of your session, you should get a screen that says, do you want a printout? So if you want to see how this all came out, just tell it to email you one at the end of the voting. Don't bail on your browser screen. Keep it open long enough to take that option if you want it. You getting close? Okay. Waiting for the ref to give me the flag another minute or so. Mark, you're got something in your mind? I mean, we're riffing here. We're waiting for the ballots.
Hi. Is this on? Yes. Let me put my name tag on so everyone knows who I am. So, my name is Mark Anthony. It seems as if there's some disagreement on privacy and UX. There's some flux here. And I would highly recommend that those folks that either disagree, strongly disagree, or even are neutral ambivalent. I understand the neutral ambivalent because you may not understand the issue, you don't want to make a suggestion. But the folks that disagree or strongly disagree, I highly suggest that you join in on the committees that are working on these issues. Because if you disagree, we need to hear your voice in those committees to make these products better. So the folks that are working the functional requirements for UX and privacy, if you could announce when those meetings are so that if there is significant disagreement, those folks can join in and help out. That would be very helpful.
Good point, and thanks. And let's take a time to do that right when I get to the end of this exercise. And are we done on this one, Andrew? Okay, how about the poll? Okay, we're done on the poll. Oop, lost my... we're done on the poll, and they switched it away, so I can't say anything about it. The poll is closed, but we're attempting to project it. How's that?
And just as a quick follow-up to that,
Oh, good.
the
Okay.
user
Good man.
experience and privacy committees both have a joint requirements discussion at 11 o'clock today. So if that is something that you're very interested in, there's already something on the agenda for today specifically around requirements.
Don't go away yet, Kim. Let's go through that one more time slowly. Anyway, results on that last one are a mixed bag. There's a lot of people with doubts about feasibility. So with that as our comment for now, bearing in mind that all this stuff is still interim work and we're going to be talking more about it during this session. Kim, if people want to participate, can we just run through the four? Is security meeting during this meeting?
They are. So the security committee is not meeting separately until 4:30 this afternoon when they have a working session. But user experience and privacy are focused on requirements at the 11 o'clock breakout session. That is happening at the same time that the healthcare committee and standards coordinating committee are meeting. But if you're focused on wanting to share feedback around specifically user experience and privacy around the requirements, they had set up a session at 11 to be able to talk about that.
Okay, so if you're here or can dial in, there's your first call for help, and thank you, Kim. But also remember, the committees will be going back and working on this for some weeks to come. So if you've got opinions, these are the people that need to hear it, and it's acknowledged that work is still proceeding. Can we switch back to the slides? We'll be bringing the tool up later for a different purpose, but not for a little while now. Okay, so thank you. Remember, we are in that segment of time now between the first look in January and the completion of the work, which we need to talk about, and we will be talking about a little later on. So give us your feedback. Even when that first session is over, it's not going to be over. This is iterative. That's a fancy word for we have to keep working it. And the reason we have to keep working it, well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that we're going to go back and look at feasibility and give some more thought to, as a group, which of these things can we put it in ask now, and which of them are really an ask that we should be making later, either because of feasibility or clarity or other external factors. That sort is something we're going to need to reach here, and that sort is going to be reflected in the work that we hope comes back here in June. Second, there's going to be another round with a full set in 2016. Third, and most importantly, if we want to have a community, if we want this to be meaningful to stakeholders, if you want folks to use these tests and principles, they're going to go out there and collide with reality and get some test experience, and then we're going to find out that we're missing something, or something's stated in a way that isn't comprehensible, or it doesn't work for some verticals, and there will be more feedback. So you need to be ready for the idea that while we continue to Kaizen and make this stuff better and better, we're not done, and it's not probably going to be an ending process. If you want people to participate, they're going to want to feel like they have the ability to give you feedback and that feedback will count. So we're at the beginning of a probably infinite feedback loop. Speaking of feedback, We have had these things for a little over a week now, and as staff, we did take a look and notice a few things. We also went out and did some limited external feedback testing, and we're going to talk to you now about that. Again, this is not Survivor Atlanta. This is not the end of the analysis. This is not even official. This is first impressions. And the next thing that happens to this stuff is the committees are going to go back and work on it more. Then when they're done, TIFTM's going to review it. And then when they're done, it's going to come to the plenary. So this isn't the last bite. We're at a very early stage. Having said that, we're going to talk a little bit about what might be missing, the quality of the content generally, problems with definitions and meanings, and who this is pointed at, starting with missing topics. It was interesting that a couple of the readers didn't see that pseudonymity, that's a tough word for me, and anonymity are well covered. It is in there. It's number 8, I believe, in the privacy requirements. But I think it may have been the impression of several that it may also, this topic may also need more robust addressing in security and in some other places. So the question was raised anyways, whether we're doing enough, because that is a set of features that is pretty clearly stressed as essential in the national strategy. There was feedback from the outside, and he can identify himself if he wants to. It's a regular participant who pointed out that some of the cybersecurity requirements address a number of cases, but may not very well address a case where somebody, having received your stolen PII, whether it's your birth date, your password, or whatnot, then uses that in a way that passes all the tokens and successfully impersonates you. And that's a case that it wasn't clear to one of our feedback parties was covered yet. So I'll just pass that back for what it's worth. And I mention it here not because it's a highly elevated issue, but because it's an example of where use cases are important. One of the things that's going to happen in our quality control work together on this is we're going to go back and look at the use cases that we've created already in the IDESG and see what they tell us about whether all these issues play through and whether these requirements actually address the issues or don't address the issues that naturally raise up from the use cases. Here's another one. Perfectly good requirement as far as our readers think, which basically say when you do things you should use standards, and some of them say you should use open standards or generally accepted standards, but some of them say you should use our standards from our standards registry. This is a perfectly good idea if we have stuff in the standards registry. We don't yet, so we've got sort of a phasing problem. And you know, if you pass the vote for the one that's coming up tomorrow, you'll have one standard in your standards registry. That isn't much better from the standpoint of telling people, go look at our standards registry, you should use this stuff. So there's some question about whether we should be rolling out some of those requirements that point to the existence of a standards registry until we've got a significant body of work in there. So that's not a critique of the idea, it's a critique of how we could phase it. And then finally, there's a lot of questions, and we'll come back to them in a minute, about vertical industries and what they need and what might be missing here. This makes us move on to the new topic, quality of content. Those of you who read internet standards for a living know that there's a cult around the use of certain words like must and should and may to be very clear when you're making a recommendation, to be very clear when you're making a requirement, to be very sure when something's optional. Some of the work that was done in these early drafts was very good at that. Some of it didn't quite nail that issue yet, and that's going to be a concern to anybody looking at it and trying to decide what is being required of them. We also have some issues with compound lengthy statements and testable statements. And here is an example. You saw the last one that was read out for privacy. That test, if I'm asked, do I pass it or not, is I think going to ask me at least 3, and depending how you count, maybe 5 questions. It's also just a long sentence. So I don't know if they got to number 19 and said, oh, geez, 20 would be too many, we better cram everything into 19. But we need, generally speaking, we need people to chop this stuff up, okay? I mean, for example, you can see the last sentence there is a separate, distinct topic. What you want is a declarative sentence that a CTO can wake up early in the morning and read before that person has their coffee and hopefully reach a deterministic answer about without a lot of effort and be confident that he or she can say yes or no. And if what somebody looking at this is a daunting massive text that has a whole lot of clauses, subordinate clauses, that CTO might say, geez, I don't know, I can't go there, I don't know how to do this, I'm afraid of this test, I don't want to play. So length is an issue, compound statements are an issue. Similarly, statements have to be testable. Now I'm going to use a couple of examples, okay? There's number 1 from privacy. Organizations shall limit the collection and transmission of information, blah, blah, blah. It's data minimization, okay? It's a policy everybody understands. But if I'm an enterprise and I'm trying to decide whether I can assert that I do this or not, how do I get to the question of whether I think that I've minimized to the minimum degree necessary, but somebody else assessing me from the outside might not? Would it matter to my ability to fulfill this and feel good about signing a piece of paper that puts a mark on my site that says I have complied with this if there was something metricized, or there was something about how I have conducted a third-party assessment for data minimization and the results indicate that, or I have done this study? You know, how do I move that to something measurable that I can defend if anybody ever challenges me on it? So measurability is an issue. This is not saying that's a bad requirement. This is saying we need to supply something that tells them how they would decide whether they've complied or not, to the degree that would be comforting if that CTO ever gets a call and somebody and she hears somebody say, you know, I disagree, you aren't minimizing, and so your statement is false, and you're frauding everybody by saying you have. So we need measurement, okay? Now, number two, let me give you an example. This is user experience number one. It may seem to be immeasurable, okay? Plain language, clear and easy to understand. But if you know about the industry, you realize that actually there's a whole bunch of semantic tests and procedures. I mean, you know, you can go out and get people to give you third-party expertized opinion on whether or not a particular piece of language is suitable for a fourth grade reading level, suitable for non-native English speech, or, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of existing technology out there that helps us answer that. So, I mean, here's an example of a criteria where probably you're going to be okay with a CTO looking at it and saying, I know how to get to a yes here in a way that I can defend. So that's something I'd like you to keep in mind, is this stuff needs to be an assertion that the asserter can defend later. Yep, compound, there we go. And harmonized meanings, that was the other one. The words user and end user came up a lot. Some of us who've participated in this group for a while remember some, you know, lengthy discussions about what that means. We have a glossary. And I think it has, what, 7 entries now? It seems likely that one of the things that's going to happen here is we're going to get more entries for our glossary, and we're going to start needing to use controlled vocabularies and want to harmonize this content in the requirements so that when we say the word, whether we say user or something else, everybody knows what we mean. So there's some work to be done that is no fault from these individual committees in harmonizing the lingo that we use. And finally, there's a number of references to the identity ecosystem. When you're in the identity ecosystem, everybody should be voluntary in the identity ecosystem. If you leave the identity ecosystem, we're probably going to need some more precision about what that means. It's not like a hotel with a revolving door. It's not like somebody stands up and says, now departing the identity ecosystem. So we're going to need to work on that one. And maybe a lot of these things really mean that when you're in a particular federation, or when you're within a group of people who is relying on your assertion, then requirements apply at the point that you stop being in that federation, or stop offering the service that causes people to rely. Anyway, we need some work on the terms, and that's another piece of feedback from us. Finally, from the FMO, some of our committees, and we will be doing awards tomorrow, so you'll get some kind of hint as to who, have done a really good job of specifying which privacy committee, which of the requirements apply to who. They actually went into the functional model, looked at the roles, did all the stuff that Mike and some other people were on the tour in Tampa explaining to committees they wanted us to fulfill a number of things with respect to the requirements. They actually showed us not just what the requirements are, but who they relate to and in what roles and when they come up. This is great, and we're all going to have to do it. Some haven't gone there yet, and that means we're actually going to have to pave the rest of that road and figure it out, because we can't just dump all those 60-some requirements on everybody. They don't apply, or they apply in different ways, or people won't be able to recognize their relationship to that requirement. So we're going to have to do some more work on applying each of these requirements to roles and functions. And that's work yet to be done to a greater or lesser degree. That's it for our feedback, and now you're going to get some other feedback. The Security Committee asked us in December, originally, as the FMO, to go out and talk to some people and get some early feedback on their functional requirements. So this next segment, I'm only going to be talking about the security documents. The Security Committee had a number of ideas about how we could go out and do surveys, focus groups, some kind of public notice, public review. There was a very interesting concepts, and actually there was a relatively broad discussion at the December Security Committee meeting, which considered a number of options, but we couldn't launch any of that stuff, a week or two before Christmas and get anything done and bring anything here. So the question of whether a larger project should be executed is still on the table, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow, not only with the Security Committee, but with everybody, because there may be some virtue to doing some more outward-facing testing and conversation about this stuff. You may want to do it now, or you might want to wait a couple months until you've got your preliminary first final set about the same time that it goes for aggregate review. However, since we wanted to bring something to this group, we asked for permission to go ahead and do a few interviews and a few focus groups that we could do within existing rules and severe time constraints to talk to a few parties that are potential stakeholders in this process to see what they thought about the security requirements, because those are the ones that asked us to get feedback. I got approval from your management, and we went ahead and did that. We did a roundtable with the NSIC pilot project participants, which we're very grateful for, by the way, guys. It was great to have a group who was actually able to come down, sit down, talk to us, and tell us what they thought. We did a number of limited interviews with IDMs, RPs, and some other associations. I don't think that by the time we're done with that early series, we'll have done any more than 8. And they're all anonymous. We did this under non-attribution ground rules, what you know as Chatham House rules if you're in UK politics, because we didn't want to know what they wanted us to hear. We wanted to know what they really think. What do you think about these requirements? Where are we? How good are they? Are we barking up the right tree? And we figured we'd better find out. So we created an instrument, a structured set of 5 questions. And again, on the screen you can see there's a URL for it. If you want to see the instrument we used, and by the way, I'm going to suggest you could use it as well. It's at this short site, j.mp/secrecqs, as cap SEC, cap REQ, cap QS. And it's also, of course, in our FMO folder in the IDESG site, and that's the full URL for that is at the bottom of that slide. The idea here was to take 5 questions and the 15 or so Security Committee requirements and send them around to people as a read-ahead and then get their feedback, which we did with these results. We asked a number of questions about, is this feasible? Does this stuff make sense? Would this be a good basis for self-assessment? You can see the questions in our instrument. Go take a look if you're interested. Here's the kind of feedback we got. One is that there was a concern that some of these statements are outcomes, not processes. And I put security number 6 up here just as an example. It was mentioned by several respondents. Not a criticism of the concept, but the problem is if I say credentials and associated tokens are granted to the appropriate and intended users only, how do I measure that? How do I operationalize that? Does that mean that 1,000 out of 1,000 times it always has to get to the right person? And if it doesn't, for whatever reason, if I've taken all reasonable steps and if I have procedures in place for proper access control and routing, but one of them fails or somebody spoofs or somebody does something illegal, nevertheless it gets to the wrong guy and so I am in violation of this, you need operational, measurable stuff, and that's one of the feedback points we heard over and over again. Another thing we heard, largely but not exclusively from regulated industry people, are how does this stuff make sense in comparison to the requirements that I already am burdened with? If I'm a regulated industry, if I'm a financial institution, I already got examination requirements that I have to follow. If you ask me, am I secure, am I private, is my UX adequate, does it confuse people? Where am I going to go? I'm going to go to the rules I already have to obey, the regulators, the systems I already have to pay attention to. If I'm in the healthcare or health payment industry, I'm going to look at the HIPAA security and privacy rules and transaction rules to ask if I'm in compliance with that. See, because I know that already, but there are other sources of advice out there. The FAIR principles, the Cloud Security Alliance cloud security tests. There's a bunch of stuff that people already use, and so to the extent our requirements relate to things that are metricized by other things already out there that they've already measured, and we can show them that they can already get a lot of the way towards answering all these questions by already looking at the stuff they've got in their audit box from doing their own reviews, it's a lot shorter drop. So strong issue from most people we talked to. A question that came up, and you saw this also reflected in the plenary review. How much of this stuff do you think I can do today versus someday after the technology or after I start to build up systems in response to heightened expectations? And then there was a question that came up twice, and I just had to mention it because I'm sorry, I'm an identity geek sometimes, so this was interesting to me. It may not be interesting to you, but there's a requirement in security that says you can authenticate the source of token and credential data. And if you think about the way tokens are floating around the world, if you're into this area of work, sometimes you get it from somebody who gets it from a broker who gets it from somebody else, and there isn't always actually a round trip all the way back to, well, let's see, what is source? If Andrew Hughes is a customer of CIBC and CIBC authenticates his identity for certain purposes in a financial transaction, let's see, is that Andrew is the source? CIBC is the source? If somebody uses that CIBC originated token later, do they have to go all the way back to CIBC? Does CIBC, which is a bank, by the way, care? So that one was a sticking point for several respondents. I think it would be fair to say that a lot of the work looked good to a lot of the folks we talked to internally and externally, but each of them also saw some as either not clear enough or too ambitious, which I have to say pretty closely reflects the poll results we saw in this room as well. There were several favorable comments, including from IT vendors, saying that particularly in unregulated industries, where there's an expectation that we're secure, there's an expectation that we're private, there's an expectation that we're usable, there's an expectation that we're open, but there's sort of no metrics for it. They have this vague hope out there in the world that their service providers will do that stuff, but because they're not regulated, they've got no metrics. So it might be, they said, useful to be able to create and define some kind of a mark system or, good housekeeping seal that tells people that they've achieved that. There's a lot of talk about whether there's a tool set or not. What else needs to be promulgated, and we talked about mapping to other requirements, but it may be that there's also benchmarks, or there are deeper definitions, or there may be test harnesses in some cases. The question came up, what kind of tools can be made available to help me do this? If I want to do it, particularly if I'm a small player, I may need some help, and I want to know what you can do for me to help me find out if I am or am not. In the area of privacy, for example, I'm just aware professionally from other sources that there are some methodology systems used to determine whether you're complying with your own privacy rules or not. And it may be that expectations like this in a requirements package will do better if we're able to ship not just the requirements and the metric statements, but also here's some tools you can use to get there and find out and to remediate. And then finally, almost everybody we talked to in industry pointed out this is a resource decision. We'll do it, but it takes time and money, mostly human effort, mostly employees, and we'll do it if it's worth it, and it's worth it if it has virtue. There was some concern about multiple methods and whether we were prepared to accept multiple methods, because there's more than one way to skin a cat, and there's more than one way to fulfill a lot of those requirements, and so anybody who is in the system and wants to assert that they are fulfilling those requirements also wants some level of confidence that they will be able to make an argument back to the certifier or to the person challenging the self-assertion that they are fulfilling them, even if they're not fulfilling them the way that the person who wrote it thinks they ought to be fulfilled. And that implies a feedback loop, which we've talked about earlier in this session. People who are going to participate in a self or third-party assessment program are going to want to know that they can talk back and influence and help improve the criteria for those assertions. A couple of folks said you need some big names to take the pledge. A lot of small parties will do it, but they'll do it if they see somebody else in the tent. So you need to get some bell cows. That's not news to us, but I'll just pass along that we heard it again. And then from several people in different ways, I've kind of synthesized here, we were asked again and again to look at this from the standpoint of a prospective adopter. That list of 60 or so that we went through today, if you're sitting in your IT shop and you're being asked, do you want to self-assess? Do you want to use this? And if you do, you get a gold star or a loving cup or a pat in the back, does it get you anything? The first questions you're going to ask aren't, what do I get? The first question you're going to ask is this stuff I can even answer? Is it measurable? Is it feasible? Is this going to be a test that I can't pass because it's pie in the sky? Is there remediation? What happens if I don't pass it? And I want to know what happens if I don't pass it before I take it, before I say yes. And finally, bluntly, what's the governance? I'm not talking about, like what's the rules of association of IDESG. I mean, if I bring a substantial company into this organization and say I'm willing to do this and self-remediate or take a third-party assertion and it doesn't work out, I want to know that this organization is open to my talking with them about what happened and how it's going to work so that the rules can continue to be improved and so that I continue to have an opportunity to influence what these criteria are. So basically, like any federation, people who are being asked to join are going to be asked whether this is a permeable process that they can join and have a voice in, and whether, you know, they're walking into a room where the mind's made up, or they're walking into a room where there's a continuing discussion, which is why I mentioned at the earliest stage that this is going to be a long, infinite loop of feedback. And that concludes my comments from our extremely informal, non-attributable survey results, which are in no way official, just some early responses we got from folks that we talked to in an attempt, with some attempt to use diversity and breadth of roles in our sampling. So, here we are. Now this stuff goes back to the committees, and as Kim read out, you saw us project on the screen, there'll be some further opportunities to talk to committees at this meeting and then for some time thereafter. How long do the committees need before they're finished? Andrew, we're going to rack up the next question. We don't have an answer to that. We thought the committees were going to be done on December 31st. It's okay that they're not, but we need to have a period of time during which the committees do their work. Now, after the committees do their work, they need to turn that stuff over to TIFTM, and TIFTM may get some staff help with this, it's up to management, and then try and harmonize and apply some of the principles we've been talking about to the final product. And then that process, which also is going to take at least a month, I would think, is going to have to terminate in time to bring some stuff to a plenary. And if you're holding a June plenary, then if you bring it to that June plenary, we will have hit our post to complete a first set by June 2015. I'm not in charge of plenary dates around here, but that's, you know, everything we do is backed up against when we have the next plenary and when we get stuff to them. So the question is, how long should we give the committees? How much more time do the committees need to finish those requirements before finalizing the first set for harmonization and then bringing up to the approval of the plenary? And anytime you're ready to start the vote, we're giving you a couple options. I think it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. But let's see, there we go. And for those who are following us remotely, the poll should be open. As before, we're going to take 2 minutes or so to make sure everybody has a chance to get their responses in. And as before, everything is non-binding. Just in case you're wondering, the people who control this decision aren't me and aren't this vote. It's your management council. They are in charge of the flow of work and the setting goals. And they have to consult with your plenary management because they have to set up meetings and get all this stuff done. So expect the chairs and the plenary chairs and the management council be consulting about when this deadline is going to be set. And we've given them our advice, which is they need to do it now. But we're taking feedback, and it's interesting to see what people have to say. Andrew, how are we on time for that? A little bit longer? All righty. Looks like we're sneaking up on a clear plurality of an opinion that they need 2 more months. It being, you know, February 1st, give or take. That'd be around an April 1st deadline. And this is feedback that will go back to your leadership and management to decide what to do next. And when you say month, that's calendar days. We're good? Okay, so on that poll, looks like there's a strong plurality believing they need about 2 more months, and a little bit of opinion on both sides of that. Some think they could get it done in a month, some think it needs 3 months. And my job on that is to take it back to your management and say, okay guys, set a deadline, which they will do. Can we switch back? So, we've been talking about the actual content quality of the requirements, and that's been the topic for today. In a minute, we're going to switch off. We're going to switch to the next steps. But before we do that, this has been an hour and a half of pure, unadulterated shtick. So we did want to stop for general questions first. So, Andrew, I don't know if you want to use the tool for general questions in the room or not. Entirely up to you. You got it set up for it if you want it. Got it. Andrew says anybody can ask any question through any mode they choose. The ones we're most likely to recognize are people standing in the room, people putting questions in the chat, and then people using the tool, because I guess the live SIF tool will also be open. So don't be afraid of, now I'm going to tell you two things. One is we've got half an hour left for this. We have one more thing to get through after this if we can, and I'm going to try and enforce a 3-minute limit on every question. So that means if you're getting up for a speech, not a question, that's fine, but I get to start throwing things after 3 minutes, and that's so we can get through this and hear everybody's opinion, all right?
And just know that there's mics available on both sides of the room.
Are we
Okay.
allowed more than one question?
Ready? Yeah, well, get in the back of the line, buddy. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, this is Adam. First, thank you very much, Jamie and the FMO. I'm actually pretty impressed with the initial feedback and see a good amount of value in it. I'm also encouraged in this is the first time that I've really took a hard look at all the requirements together, and I'm pretty encouraged where things are, and I can see a path to us getting to where we need to be. But almost as a segue into your next step, this is just me speaking, not on behalf of the committee, but I think I was expecting, and I also think it's necessary that there is some work around normalizing and leveling these requirements across all the requirements and across an establishment of sort of a baseline. The Security Committee spent quite a lot of time trying to figure out what is the right baseline, what is a baseline, and we really could not get to a good point on that, so we just took our best stab on the requirements. So I'm slightly concerned that some of the requirements are going to be, very demanding, and some will be less demanding. And when you look at them overall, that will create challenges in getting support and buy-in and adoption of it. And so there's a normalizing. So I wanted to just get some feedback about that. We just discussed about the next steps for the committees. We clearly have some security. That feedback. I was writing down a lot of notes about things that we're going to start on this afternoon at 4:30. So we have some things to do immediately, but I think there is some across-the-board work that will be needed before we can actually have the next full draft out of the Security Committee, and I'd just like to talk about that. Normalizing them across all of them, making them comparable, and making whatever, some decisions around what is an appropriate baseline across some core aspect of is important, and as you can see, I'm challenged in defining it because it's hard to define. Who has some thoughts on that?
Thanks, Adam. And certainly one possible outcome is for the groups, either individually or when the stuff is combined, to sort things and say, these are for now, these are a little more ambitious, these are good, but these are for later. But that's for the group to decide. I've got two more folks in this queue, and then Andrew, in a second, I may ask you if you want to read out remote questions. Don't have anything yet. Yep, they aren't yet. Okay.
So just for folks for the live SIFT, you can submit the questions anonymously. They're not identified, and that 0 will start to count up as people type in questions into the tool. So we encourage you to give it a try if you want to. But verbal questions and chat questions are fine as well.
Okay, Andrew, I'll rely on you to see if anything on the chat window rises to the level of a question. Let's get another person from the live audience first. Kathy?
One of the things you mentioned was that you needed to have some clarity on who the requirement applied to, and you used the user and user. I think that to do that, we're going to have to come to some agreement on who the actors are, and I'm not sure we've done that yet. And also alignment with the functional model probably should be done consistently. But beyond that, and who the requirements apply to, and forgive me if you address this, Jamie, and I zoned out or something, but it seems to me that the requirements also don't apply at each assurance level, that some requirements would apply at the lower levels, but other requirements might apply at the higher levels. Because we also haven't defined what those secure assurance or risk levels are, that might be difficult initially, but I think we're going to have to get there.
Thanks. Kathy, you make 2 points. The first one's excellent, and I'll have to say, if the functional model and the roles that are defined in it don't yet meet your needs for identifying actors, then that's a critique that impeaches the functional model. So what we hope will be the eventual outcome here, as all this stuff marries up, is that as you go back and look at things and become precise and clear if there's a lack of clarity about who it applies to, that will then tell you whether you've got a place to hang your hat in the functional model or not. And if you don't, then we need to fix the functional model so you have one. So there's that. And let's hold on that second point. It's a good point, though. Yeah, I've got one on this one. Yeah, we do. We have first question came out. Okay. What is the good. They display, but I'll read it anyway. For those who aren't following in live SIFT, one of the questions that came in through that feature is this: what is the anticipated relationship between the ID ecosystem requirements and the sum of the trust marks to be created? Who wants to field that one? We need a trust mark expert. And we have one at the microphone, happily. Jack Zeus, please.
When we did the IDEF plan back in the late fall, one of the things that we put on the plan was a question of, would we do trust mark componentization? In the plan, what we said is it was still too early to know if, in fact, that was going to be something that was viable and had demonstrated proof of concept, because Georgia Tech was going into their pilot in the fall. In the plan, it's laid out that January through the end of February, we should be evaluating the results of Georgia Tech and determining whether or not we would be going with multiple trust marks or not. And so that is a to-do that the Management Council, TIFTM, and other groups have to be looking at related to the Georgia Tech. So it's to be determined, essentially, related to this, whether we would be doing multiple trust marks or not, or whether there will just be one set of requirements that you meet and you're either in or not related to that.
Okay, thanks, Jack. And just for people who maybe haven't been following along, is the GTRI project done to the degree necessary to reach that determination? Have you got results?
I believe there's going to be more conversations, and in fact, John is going to present the results at tomorrow's meeting.
So there you go. So we'll hear more here. And then is it TIFTM that's in the lead in making the analysis you described about the feasibility of decomposing that stuff?
I would guess that the way we left it at the last time was that the subcommittee that was part of the IDEF plan, it was part of the Management Council, was going to review that work, and then based upon the feedback that came, they would make a recommendation to the Management Council and TIFTM.
Got it.
And so I think we'll be seeing that IDEF group subcommittee of the Management Council first look at it, since they had spent quite a bit of time with Georgia Tech in the summer and early fall.
Okay, so there's your answer. And Jack, I took advantage of you because you were standing there, but were you also in queue because you had a question?
I did.
Go for it.
And so the question / comment that I wanted to raise was that when we did the IDEF plan, one of the real areas of discussion was making sure that during the calendar year 2015, we could have an ID ecosystem that actually had entities in it. And what that meant is that, and you'll see even in the plan, it talked about an initial set of requirements, baseline and then full. We wanted to be able to have a very low bar initially. And the reason that we wanted to have a low bar was that we wanted to be able to make sure that everyone could look at the requirements who would potentially want to participate and say, yes, I can do that, so that we could get some experience running an ecosystem, bringing entities in, getting them using the ecosystem. And so we had deliberately set up a two-phased approach where we were trying to set something at a very low bar. And I think one of the things that got lost in the process of committees doing the requirements was this two-step approach. What is really looking like is happening is we're trying to develop the full set of ecosystem requirements that sort of map back to the NSTIC area. To the extent that companies are going to take 6 or 9 months to evaluate those requirements and determine whether or not they can comply, that is going to keep us from launching an active ecosystem this year. And so it's a discussion that we as a group have to be determining what is baseline, what is full, do we want to do that or not. But I just wanted to reiterate that that was part of the planning process, that we would have a two-step process.
Great, and we got some feedback today, albeit informal, on perceptions of feasibility, and that's good to have. We had, I'll just mention, we had one more question that was displayed for a while there. The two questions were both comments. One of them was, I like online voting. What's the first one? And then let's see, this one, do I punch this? How do I display that other one? Punch display, somebody got it? Press display. All right, there we go, and here's our other comment. Everybody likes the survey, okay, so that's good. Looks like we're getting some votes in favor of live SIF. I'm going to take a live SIF selfie, and we're done. That's my evidence. Anybody up on? I don't have any more questions in queue here. Andrew, have you been keeping an eye on the chat there? Did anything become a question on that end? Comments, but no questions. Okay. And let's see. And yeah, we're getting friendly stuff here. But I want to take pictures of that one too. But. No actual questions. Okay, last call then. We have one more thing to do here. Does anybody else want to raise any questions or make any short interventions at this time before we move on to the next topic? I'm loving that. Oh yeah, now I'm getting some numbers. You can see up that screen we're getting some questions, and I actually have a screen here where I can promote the questions, and that means if somebody sends something dilatory, I don't have to promote it, but we're just moving them all up there one at a time. Okay, and then I like this live SIF process too. Okay, great. Lots of good votes for live SIF. Let's find an actual question. Here we go. All right, here's an honest to God question. The marketplace of IDPs will compete on the basis of privacy, interoperability, and UX. How do we expect to support that in a balanced way? Okay, anybody want to say they can answer that in one sentence, and we'll just make you God and call it quits? We don't have an answer for that one yet, but I'll give you my answer, and then I'm going to look to your leadership and see if they want to comment on it. My answer is that the process we're going through is supposed to discover a set of criteria that will help form expectations for those things, and that if we are able to create an engine for community formation of those expectations in a self-regulating way, then people will want to participate in that process, and it will encourage understanding of those criteria, which will then reinforce consumer expectations, and we'll start to create some actual metrics and trust marks that will promote that marketplace. That's my answer, but let me also actually look to you two. You're next. Kim, do you want to take a swing at that one?
I wanted to answer that.
Oh, I want to see if the boss has got a word. She wants Jack to go first. Go.
Well, I was just going to say, within the IDEF plan, we talked about that issue. And one of the things that we really debated was there's both a minimum standard, but then how do you create an exceptionally high ceiling that people can, ascribe to? And that really was a key element in thinking about having a broad-based trust mark program, where trust marks may go beyond just what is the baseline for participating and be able to now allow consumers and others to be able to see that certain companies are going above and beyond where it comes to practices and things like that. And so that was part of the vision that we were hoping to have to incent people to be moving into spaces to do the right thing.
I agree. I think that the main thing that the purpose of us working around getting a framework for the ecosystem is to help all the stakeholders focus on the IDESG principles. And so I don't think that we have to try to support it in a balanced way. We're supposed to just make sure that that's where people are focused on. So I think that what everybody said is exactly right.
Good, thanks. A couple more things coming up on the screen here from the remote crowd. A statement which is in favor of multiple levels. Let's see if that comes out. See if I'm doing this right. And a question, which is, what artifacts will the requirements process create? Well, big question, but let me try the short version, Jack, and throw something at me if you think I'm missing something. In the first instance, there will be lists like you saw. There will be contextual explanations that help people understand what they mean that are longer than those declarative sentences for people who need more. We hope that there will be, based on the work done in September, tie-outs to the other tools that we have created, like the functional models and the roles, so that you can see where it's contextualized. And then, as you saw in today's discussion, we hope there will also be some tool development. Jack, what else should we mention in terms of what artifacts we expect this to create?
Well, I think you've hit on most of them, but right now, one of the issues that TIFTM is looking at is based upon the degree of the number of requirements and how we're going to be setting up the program, that's going to determine what artifacts have to be there. And one of the things that we've talked about in the committee is that we would really like this to be an iterative process where we're getting some feedback from potential pilots, other groups, because trying to create a whole set of rigid documents and other pieces and then finding that it's not really working appropriately with the intended stakeholders is one that frankly isn't going to do anybody any good. And so what we're really trying to do is get things started, learn from those, iterate into the next level. The good thing about 2015 is if we could get started with a base level and really learn from that, we felt we would be in a much better position as we're really launching from strength in 2016 with all the pieces put together into a full-blown system.
Thanks. I got a couple more in queue, and I've got Kathy, you're in queue, and you want to go ahead in the room?
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to recant part of my previous comment. I went back and looked at the functional model. I think that it is sufficient for us to use as a starting place for tying the requirements back to those what are called roles in the functional model. I think as we do that, we may wind up having feedback into the functional model, but if we can take those, say there's a generic requirement and decompose it into parts that says a credential provider shall this, some other role shall do something else. So I would just encourage the groups that are working on these requirements to go back and take a look at that functional model, and as you go through the next iteration of your requirements, see if you can't tie those requirements to the specific roles that are identified in the functional model.
Super, thanks. And note, among the queuing devices we have, there's some comments in the live chat. Martin Smith says, please include a traceability matrix as part of those artifacts. So, let's see, we got a couple more. Okay, one more coming up in the outside question. Is participation in IDESG intended to be all or nothing? That is to say, no room to agree, but only within a given scope. I'm going to reinterpret that. I don't think that the questioner, who is anonymous, means participation like you can come and participate in an IDESG meeting. I assume they mean people who use these assertion techniques. Can you say you're conformant with numbers 5, 6, and 7, and maybe your interpretation is 6, but your interpretation is different than IDESG's? Well, that is frankly part of what Jack was just talking about in terms of the decomposability of trust marks, and is one of the decisions this group is going to have to cope with and is not yet decided. So the answer is, if you have opinions about that, go talk to TIFTM and be part of this conversation when it comes back to this plenary at what I hope will be its next meeting. Got somebody else in queue. Naomi?
Yes, this is Naomi Lefkowitz. Sorry if I missed this, but just having looked at some of these requirements now, if a committee feels like, oh, some of these requirements may conflict with, or at least some goals, right? Like, for example, if a particular requirement would conflict with a privacy goal, is there a process that you're running to do that, or should the committee just reach out to the other committee and organize it on their own?
The answer is both. The question is about collision of requirements between committee lists, and the answer is A, some of them are meeting jointly today to do that very thing, and we hope those conversations will occur, but also when they're turned back over to us at the date that management decides we should use, and the vote was 2 months, then there will also be a further vetting process in which they'll be compared for, among other things, potential contradictions. Andrew, you had more on that?
Yeah, Jamie. So as vice chair of the TFTM committee, we've been discussing what role TFTM would have in that reconciliation, conflict management, and negotiation between the other committees. And more or less, we're going to try to facilitate discussions between the committees on how to resolve differences, specific wording, language. TFTM might provide an opinion from our committee about some input into the decision making. But TFTM is going to be a conduit, not an enforcer.
Got it. Thanks. And I've got one more to put up, which is a great question, on which reasonable minds will differ. How concerned should we be at this point in time to ensure completeness, degree of stringency, or willingness of prospects to sign up? Which I interpret as sort of the feasibility question. Are we trying to get to the perfect, or are we trying to get to the good enough to get lots of people to play? The official answer is that's up to you folks. You need to decide how perfect you want things to be versus how reachable you want them to be and which one to roll out with first. And as your committees go back and consider your requirements, take in the feedback you received today and the feedback you get from each other in the community, you'll need to decide whether you want to put out a subset or whether you want to promote some things into the preliminary baseline set or whether you want to hold some things back for a full eventual set, and that's part of the determination you need to make. Having said that made it clear as a disclaimer that it's up to you. I'll tell you what I think personally. I think it's extremely important. I think if a self-assessment test falls in the forest and there's no one there to use it, I'm not sure what we've been doing for the last 3 years. So I think that sense of having a set of rules and procedures and requirements that stakeholders can recognize and make use of is essential. But that's personal opinion. And we got another opinion from the floor.
Yeah, I'd like to...
this is Jeremy Grant, by the way.
Jeremy Grant from the MPO folks. I'd like to echo that opinion or state it a little bit differently. One of the things I've talked about when we talk about NSTIC and what we're trying to do here within the steering group, is when we look at what we're trying to accomplish, let's sort of look at the deck that we've been dealt to begin with. I often talk about, as an old political science major, I learned a lot about legislation, I learned a lot about regulation, I even learned about executive orders. Strategies was not in the curriculum back in Ann Arbor, in part because it's a bit of a novel way to try and actually affect change through public policy. And, at the end of the day, what NSTIC calls on is for the private sector to come together and collaborate with the government and try to come up with something that can really be a foundation to help advance the marketplace. The ultimate arbiter of whether what we're doing here in this organization is worth a dang or not is going to be whether other parties who aren't here actually pick this up in the marketplace and use it. And so what I've, been quite encouraged by through this whole process, by the way, great work from all the committees, all of you folks from the steering group staff and the FMO who have helped, pull all of these things together. Great first start. I think we've learned this is a good start, and we've got some more work to do to try and refine things. But, at the end of the day, we need to come up with something that can be relevant. And as much as, how should I say it, our office is, the guardian of the NSTIC, and we push very hard to make sure that all of the requirements that are articulated in it go forward. It does need to be, it is a strategy, and it needs to be balanced in this organization against what the marketplace is willing to actually adopt. So we've been really encouraged by the direction that is laid out in the framework development plan, looking at let's identify different requirements, ways to componentize them, and then ways for organizations to basically come out and say, well, here's what we're going to do, and there might be some things that they won't. And that may leave some people unhappy that they don't get everything. I'm somebody who wants everything deep down. But it also will provide a way to start testing these ideas that we're coming up with in the marketplace and seeing how valuable they are and how accepted they are. And I think we will learn a lot from that approach rather than trying to essentially build the ideal triangle in a vacuum or in a cave, right? And perhaps never see it, used outside of that. So just a few deep thoughts.
Good, and thanks, Jeremy. We've got time for one more use of the toy. So we're going to turn off the question queue. We may have missed one or two, my apologies, but we're close out of time. Can we move on to that last polling question, which is essentially whether you think we should go out and get more feedback. We did a very informal survey that is not scientific, trying to do some sampling, but talking to some people who would talk to us underground rules. And again, thanks to the pilot project participants, the NSTIC pilots who also bellied up and helped us with that. But now the question is, what are we going to do next? I think there is, Andrew, one more question on the rack. Let's see if you got it. Yes. how can we make the requirements better? I'm not asking whether we're going to do this now or wait a couple months until the next process is completed and we have final products. But the question is, do we want to go out and get more feedback as part of our development process? And there's a bunch of different ways we could do it, which I think Andrew's going to display now as using the tool as voting options. We're just looking for some feedback from you, again, non-binding, based on your impressions today, what we could do to make that stuff happen and get further feedback from the outside. See, I don't have a set presented for me to vote on yet. Andrew, do we have one from the screen? There we go. Okay, it's up.
It's a ranking.
Okay, there you go. And now all four of the options are displayed. Just ship first and then get feedback later, or do formal surveys, or do focus group meetings, or do more informal consultation along the lines of what we did today. What's the vote? Yep, and the ranking order is going to take a while because every time somebody votes, it flips around. So we can just sit here and watch the bars move for a while. These are not the bars for your cell phone connectivity. These are votes you're seeing on the screen. I don't know, Andrew, I'm going to need some more guidance from my ref here on when we think this thing is done. It's still moving. I think it's going to be a little while. If you're in the home audience here, we're ranking the four options for how to proceed in terms of next steps once we have another rev of the requirements. And then when we're done with this vote, we'll call it a day. At which point I think, Kim, we have a break and then breakout sessions, right? Good. Okay, our ref is ready to call it. The survey says informal consultation is good. Getting it out the door is also somewhat good. Fewer people, although not an insignificant number, are in favor of going out and doing some broader, more formal instruments, either in the form of surveys or focus group meetings. So nobody's saying any of these are invalid instruments, but it looks like the taste in the room today is more for doing a few more point-to-point conversations with potential stakeholders and getting it out the door. And that feedback will be duly passed on to management and your committees. And I thank you very much for your time today in a long session that's helpful to move things forward. Further discussions, of course, are always welcome. Contact any of us at any time, but mostly right now at this point, contact the committees and tell them what you want to see based on what you've seen today. Thanks for your time. Do we need to make any announcements, Kim, about breaks? Okay.
So Jamie and Paul, thank you so much for coordinating this effort. I think this was a really informative session. Did you all get a lot out of this one? Yeah, I really thought it was really helpful to see the amount of work that all of the committees have been doing to put together these requirements. Reading them and being able to use a real-time feedback tool was really beneficial, I think. And so thank you also for the remote audience for really also sharing your comments throughout this process. So we're not done. It's something that we're going to continue to work on. We will work with the Management Council to determine if the timeline to get this completed, we need a deadline. We need to focus on trying to keep moving on this and delivering something. But I think we're on the right path. This was a really refreshing activity. So thanks again for everybody.